Well, hello and welcome to this week's A Photographic Life. I want to read you 3 short pen portraits of 3 American photographers with 3 names that I suggest you discover or reconsider. These are Louise Dahl Wolfe, George Hoynigan Hune, and George Platt Lynes. Their work may no longer be fashionable, contemporary, discussed or considered. But I feel that all 3 have a great deal to offer any and every photographer in 2025. And this is, and has never been, a podcast that talks about the photographers everyone else is talking about or promoting. There's also a specific reason why I was reminded of these photographers, which I'll reveal later. But let's start off with Louise Dahl Wolfe, shall we? Born in California, she studied at the San Francisco Institute of Art. In 1921, while working as a sign painter, she discovered the photographs of Anne Brigman, a pictorialist based in California and associated with the Stieglitz Circle in New York. Although greatly impressed by Brigman's work, Dahl Wolfe did not take up photography herself until the early 1930s. Travel with the photographer Consuelo Canaga in Europe in 1927 to 1928 piqued her interest in photography once again. In 1932, when she was living with her husband near the Great Smoky Mountains, she made her first published photograph, Tennessee Mountain Woman. After it was published in Vanity Fair in 1933, she moved to New York City and opened a photography studio, which she maintained until 1960. After a few years producing advertising and fashion photographs, she was hired by Carmel Snow as a staff fashion photographer for Harper's Bazaar. I should say Carmel Snow was the editor at the time of Harper's Bazaar. Anyway, and that was in 1936. Dahl Wolfe was especially well known during the infancy of colour fashion photography for her exacting standards in reproducing her images. Her insistence on precision in the colour transparencies made from her negatives resulted in stunning prints, whose subtle hues and unusual gradations in colour set the standard for editorial colour photography in the 1940s and 1950s. Dahl Wolfe remained with the magazine, with Harper's Bazaar, until 1958, after which time she accepted freelance assignments from Vogue and Sports Illustrated until her retirement in 1960. Dahl Wolfe lived many of her later years in Nashville, Tennessee, and she died in New Jersey of pneumonia in 1989. So there we have a trailblazing female photographer that you may not have heard of. Let's move on to the second, shall we? George Hoynigan Hune was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, and became one of the great exponents of fashion and portrait photography of the 1920s and 30s. Fleeing the Russian Revolution, he moved first to London and then to Paris in 1920, where he began working as a fashion draftsman, publishing his work in Harper's Bazaar, that magazine again, and Fairchilds magazine. By 1925, he had become the chief photographer for French Vogue, and in 1935 he moved to New York and began working almost exclusively for Harper's Bazaar. He excelled at stylish studio compositions, using shadows and elaborate lighting, but also created quintessentially modernistic open-air swimwear pictures. Hoynigan Hune was also one of the first photographers to take pictures of models from above. In 1943, he published 2 picture books, Hellas and Egypt, and soon after moved to Hollywood, where he became active in the motion picture industry, photographing celebrities and working as a colour consultant on films such as A Star is Born. He died aged 68 years of age in Los Angeles. So there's another photographer for you to check out, George Hoynigan Hune. Now let's move on to our third photographer, George Platt Lynes, who was born in 1907 and had his first solo exhibition at the Leggett Gallery in 1932, followed by a two-man exhibition at Julian Levy Gallery with Walker Evans. By 1933, Lines was a central figure in the New York photography scene. He quickly became known for his highly stylized images, characterized by his Hollywood approach to lighting and surrealistic props. He received commissions from Harper's Bazaar again, Town and Country and Vogue. In 1946, Lines moved to Los Angeles to head Vogue's magazine's Hollywood office, but by 1948 financial pressure forced him to return to New York. Unfortunately, his earlier success was difficult to reclaim, and by late 1951 his failure to pay taxes led the government to close his studio and auction off his cameras. Lines' later photographs, particularly his nudes, are marked by a significant change of style. He abandoned the highly staged tableau of his earlier nudes in favour of a straightforward, minimalist aesthetic, featuring few, if any, props. These later images are simple and honest portraits of naked men. In 1949, Lines began a personal and professional friendship with Dr. Alfred C. Kinsey, who, having published his controversial book, Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male, the previous year, was beginning his research on homosexuality. Although buying and selling nude male photographs was illegal at the time, Kinsey eventually managed to purchase over 600 of Lines' prints, along with several hundred negatives for his new archive. After being diagnosed with lung cancer in 1954, Lines destroyed many of his negatives and prints, including his fashion photography, as well as his nudes. I may not be alone with my suggestion to look back at the work of these photographers working in the new 30s. A new film is now being shown on Platt Lines. And have we had a lot of photographers, being put under the documentarian, microscope. I was thinking of also of a looking glass, of filmmakers. That film is released now and called Hidden Master. I've yet to see it myself, but it looks interesting, created by art director Sam Shahid, who has brought together the collection of work and Lines' life, in this film. So look out for Hidden Master and look out for those photographers. I think you'll be richly rewarded. The three photographers I've just discussed are obviously all masters in their own work within analog photography. Louise Del Wolfe working with colour, the other two working with black and white primarily. And yet, that was the 1930s. Today, as photographers, I want to ask a question. What is it with analog? Why is there this sort of almost kind of evangelical feeling around analog photography? Particularly, it would seem, with people who are just starting out with photography or who are young photographers. Now, I've got cards on the table here. I run a course, a degree course and an MA course, where analog photography is not either required or conducted. It's not practiced. We don't teach it. I don't see any reason to do so. For me, we have to think about the idea of 2025 and where we are today and using the tools that are available to us to create our photography. Now, sure, analog photography is still available to us and we can go back to that if we wish. I don't have a problem with that per se. The issue I have with it is, I suppose, a question about what is it being used for? Is it being used because of a love of the practice, of the loading of a camera, of going into a dark room, of all of that process? Or is it being used to learn how to see and make work? Because from my perspective, the best way to do that is with digital photography. That immediate result that you get allows you to think more about the photograph in the moment. Now, I worked as an analog commissioned photographer for roughly 10 years, I suppose. I don't have a problem with using it when I didn't have an option. And also, I have to say, when my clients were paying for it, but also when I paid for it, it wasn't too bad. I didn't grow up as somebody who had a father with a darkroom, or I built a darkroom under the stairs or in a bathroom. I grew up with a father who actually did enjoy photography, but he took his film to get processed at the local camera shop. And therefore, that's kind of my, I suppose, relationship with photography. I'm interested in the actual making of the photograph, not the process behind it. Now, the other issue, of course, now is the cost. Film is expensive, processing is expensive, and scanning is even more expensive. Now, as I say, if you're interested in that process, I can understand why you'd be investing in your hobby. As a professional photographer, you might be somebody who grew up with analog photography and has always used it, and it's part of that process, is part of your work. Okay, fine. I get that also. The problem I'm having at the moment with analog is the fetishization of analog, in that it is true photography, and that digital photography can't be true photography. Now, surely we're over that by now. All these years that we've had digital capture, surely we're over that idea that analog is better. Sure, it's different. But as I'm always saying, you don't think about the idea of making music on a mandolin or a lute or a sousaphone. You might think about using an electric guitar, microphones, amplifiers, Pro Tools, the dreaded auto-tune, whatever it may be, recording beats on your phone. You would be moving and adapting with the time. And although there are always people who are keeping the flag flying for traditional music and traditional ways of playing it, and orchestras and classical music, and again, absolutely fine. But the reality is that that's not necessarily the only way or the right way to learn about music. And I feel the same way around analog and photography. Now, this may ensure that my email inbox is going to get flooded with people telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about, back off, it's not expensive, it's great, and all the rest of it. Okay, again, that's fine. But I've yet to hear anybody explain to me clearly, without prejudice, that analog photography is a better way to learn how to see. That's the end of this week's rant. In fact, I haven't had a rant, I don't think, for quite a while. But this whole analog thing does sometimes wind me up. But there you go. I probably shouldn't allow it to. What doesn't wind me up is the responses we get from you to what we do. Listeners' letters is what I call them. But of course, very rarely do those responses come in letter form. Well, it seems that a lot of you really enjoyed the conversation that Bill Shapiro and I had on a recent episode, check it out, on what is street photography. So I thought I'd share some of those comments with you. We spoke about Joseph Michael Lopez, the photographer, in the episode, and he got back to us and he said, essentially, we photograph who we are. Those of us who possess this obsessive nature to give ourselves over to this deep practice of photography, the frame, is a way to question things or point something out, a kind of coping mechanism between a form of expression and educational discovery. You have to really embody an internal urgency that propels you to say something. We have to take risks and have an imagination, or else nothing moves. Photo Ken Arts on our YouTube channel said, words and definitions change over time, moving forward, adapting to the ever-changing human values. Remember when hip meant cool or fashionable? Before then, it was firstly known as a part of the human anatomy. I first heard the term label street photography in the late 80s at college. I don't recall how often it was stated or spoken of back then. Very little from what I can recall. It's only with the advent of Instagram that the term has been democratized to mean something different than what I first learned of it. Maybe that's the issue. It wasn't fully fleshed out in popular culture to maintain whatever meaning it had back then. Bill Shapiro's mention of homogenization closely relates to I'm getting at. By the way, Gary Winogrand was asked this question in a Michael Engler documentary video from 1982. You can find it on YouTube. I'll leave you to find out his answer by watching it. Paul Thompson 2991 commented, I found myself agreeing almost 100% with what was said, which was irritating. I'm joking, of course. This genre of photography has to evolve, surely, and evolving cannot be the usual trope, as Bill mentioned, about people walking with a long stride out of deep shadow, usually with a phone in hand, slot machine popcorn photography. I too sometimes shoot this genre of photography, but I am always extremely aware of being discerning about what is actually worth keeping, let alone publishing. Does it just add to the usual fog? What am I trying to say with this? Does it say anything new that hasn't already been said 100,000 times? Has it already been said 100 times better by another photographer? Would I be better off sipping on a cold IPA and eating an expertly selected ham and cheese platter? It's not easy, but it shouldn't be easy. Maybe even painful in its pursuit and capture. John Hosgood 6852 said, it seems that the problem is not so much with the images as the definition of street photography. A great portrait can be made in a street setting, but that does not necessarily fall into the same category as images of strangers being caught unaware. As with documentary, there are no definitive terms of reference. So all of that there was pretty interesting. Mark Krajnak I think this was on Thread, said, another interesting listen to a discussion between Grant and Bill. One of my thoughts was if the whole specialness of street photography has been taken away because of the deluge of that hashtag on all socials, and can be said that other genres as well, even portrait. Elliot, who's one of my old students actually, Elliot Gunn, said, good listen, I'm here 4 to 5 years into finding a form of photography I'm passionate about after stopping for a few years after I left university, because all I wanted to be was a fashion photographer. Discovering street photography helped me get back into a passion I wasn't sure I'd ever do again, taking photos and documenting my life, which I wish I knew back then. I think the term is definitely overused, and always tell people I take photos of life on the street because it's beautiful. Well, thank you to Elliot, and thank you to everybody else there who's given us their feedback. I hope each episode gives you enough to actually feedback on. I am expecting quite a bit of feedback on that Analogue rant that I had, or maybe you'll just ignore it. I never know for sure. I do know for sure, though, that over the coming week, the one thing you need to do is, of course, let's all say it together, shall we? Take care.